times like these gives the president broad powers. Do you regret that? Do you think that lawmakers should be more in the mix, that this constitution should be amended?
I don't think the constitution should be amended, but I think that a vote should be organized by the president.
But he doesn't have to.
Yes, but it's also a political choice. As we have seen, for example, with Barack Obama, I think it's a question of democracy. It's not the first time we are intervening. There is the Iraqi case, the Afghan case, the Libyan case, and we see that it's difficult. The opinion is widely divided with a majority in favor of no intervention. So it would be the least to have a vote of the Congress in order to have the opinion of the lawmakers and to know whether the whole institutions of France are willing to go into that intervention.
All right, the demand for a vote. Arnaud Danjean, the French president, so far, as you heard from the Prime Minister, is holding off on that. Over the past 48 hours, when you've seen, and I was in the newsroom and many people were watching the debate in the Commons before that vote, there's a lot of French people who've been coming up to me the last 48, 72 hours saying to me, you know, in France, it's true that our lawmakers don't have enough power.
Yes, it's true. I think it should be very useful to have a vote. Institutionally, the president does not have to organize a vote, but I think politically it would make sense. And I would just recall that François Mitterrand did that. In 1991, before going to war in Iraq, in the first Gulf War, there was a vote of confidence in the parliament. So there is a precedent.
But in that case, hold on, in that case, he put boots on the ground. In this instance, they're talking about just airstrikes.
Yes, but you don't know the limit of what's going to happen. You always know when you start a war. You never know how and when it will end. And let me tell you that one of the main problems we face is it's precisely that, the strategy behind the strikes or beyond the strikes, because we are told limited strikes equal limited risk. I don't buy that. I don't buy that. Nobody knows the consequences, even if it's limited strikes. So I think there should be a vote from the parliament. We see the skepticism of the people. We very well feel the skepticism of our allies. We feel the skepticism of the MPs and political and even of the experts. So there should be a vote. Politically, it makes sense to have a vote, and it wouldn't destroy the Constitution. It had not destroyed the Constitution in 1991.
William Jordan, last Wednesday, Barack Obama, in an interview with American Public Television, said that the strikes would be, quote, a shot across the bow. Can you do that in Syria? Is it possible?
No. No, of course not. And I think, you know, the problem, getting back to some things we were talking about earlier, I think in a lot of ways, President Obama is almost regretting what he said a year ago. I think the red line over chemical weapons use is in many ways a red herring, given what is really going on in Syria. I mean, as tragic and horrible as it is, I mean, and this is a crime against humanity. This is a heinous act that needs to be punished in some way. But I'm not sure, and I don't think a majority of people in France, the United States, or even the United Kingdom, or almost anywhere, believe that the sort of even specific limited military strike that President Obama is calling for is going to be the answer here. I mean, and as I said earlier, there is no situation that I could find, as a quick Google search over the past few hours, that indicates when the Chemical Weapons Convention has been invoked in this sort of way. And the Chemical Weapons Convention makes very few references to how you deal with this kind of a situation. The only real recourse the CWC framework has is to the United Nations. It does not talk about unilateral action of this sort. And so, given everything that is at play in Syria, and given the very complex situation there, you really do have to ask all of these questions about the day after and whether this kind of an action, which will be an act of war against Syria, what good will it really do?
And Nivat, a piece you wrote for the French edition of Vanity Fair, you said, between doing nothing and sending missiles, the spectrum is large.
Absolutely.
What is that spectrum? What's in that spectrum?
We are starting a war if we're going to, we say it's going to be limited, but these are only words. There are 2 points I want to make. I heard Mr. Hérault saying, we need to punish them, we will be sending a message. And I'm quite disturbed by this sending a message of obsession by our politicians because, and I even heard in America on those talk show radios, military people also being disturbed by that, commenting on that negatively and saying, you don't start a war, you don't do a war to send a message. That's quite disturbing. And secondly, France, in that case, is doing nothing but
there are precedents for that, right? There were strikes in Sudan, there have been strikes in North Africa.
That means we are not drawing the conclusion, the lessons from the past. Again,
no, but there are precedents where there were limited strikes. It has existed in the past. It happened.
It didn't work.
It didn't work. That's right. It didn't work. It didn't work. It never works. It never does. But I would like to add something regarding France, that we are following what the Americans do. That's not the first time we have been doing that under President Sarkozy in Afghanistan. And this is something that strikes me the most, because we did an operation in Mali, and this operation was quite decisive, was quite well done. And where is France now? Where is the French vision of another operation, military operation?
But when you said in your piece, between doing nothing and sending missiles, there's a wide spectrum, what do you put in that spectrum? What do you do?
The spectrum would be diplomacy. Of course, diplomacy.
Well, and the Chemical Weapons Convention talks about sanctions.
Sanctions. We did
but
that
aren't
in
there
Iraq.
already sanctions? Arnaud Danjean, there are already sanctions.
Yeah, but still, there is no peace plan. You were talking about precedents. Look at the precedent we had, for example, with air campaign, not limited air campaign, but full sustained air campaign like Kosovo, for example, or Afghanistan 2001. We had political plans. We had diplomacy backing that. We had a lot of talks, even with Russia, even with warring parties. I remember we struck Milosevic twice, in Bosnia 95 and then in Kosovo 99. But both times, we continue to talk with him. We continue to try to find a political solution. Here, we want to punish Bashar, but not talking to him and not making a decisive strike in the war. So what's the effect of all that? What's the day after?
What happens when the Syrians resort to chemical weapons again? I mean, if the net result of this strike is that it doesn't actually dissuade them from using chemical weapons, then what do you do? What's the next step?
Add to that, he's, with this extra time that he's bought, so to speak, he's reportedly moving his weapons, his material into civilian areas. So, the consequences of that,
All right, so there is no plan for now, at least not a visible one, for what happens politically, how you build the peace afterwards. But there's a tweet here from Samarokla, who says, if Obama keeps procrastinating and ends up doing nothing, he risks being taken lightly by allies. Successive French governments, by the way, not just François Hollande, his predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy, and his foreign minister both said Assad should go. Now they're talking about a political solution. Is it all of the West that's going to be taken lightly by allies?
I'm not sure all the West, because it will depend also on the vote. And I think that Barack Obama, like David Cameron, has bought himself an exit from the crisis. Because if the Congress says no, he can say, okay, the Congress says no, then I'm not going to act. And given that the world opinion is a huge majority against, as it seems in the UK or even in France, it will not damage so much the image. But I think there is here in the Prime Minister intervention a major contradiction, because he invokes the legal international law to intervene because of the use of weapons of mass destruction. And then he does not want to have a vote in the UN. So there is a major contradiction.
Sorry, in the UN?
In the UN, he does not ask for a vote of the UN to support an intervention. Because
in the Security Council.
Yeah, in the Security Council. It would be more coherent to say, okay, we are going to intervene, but let's ask the UN. as was done, for example, for Libya. And there is a major contradiction to say
They've
everything
given up
is
on the
going
UN
to be
Security Council.
decided by the US Parliament.
They've had to give. I mean, they've been very explicit. Both Barack Obama, Hollande, French officials, they've given up on the Security Council given the repeated Russian opposition. They just don't see it as a viable mechanism for better or for worse. They don't see it as an actual forum in which any political solution, at least in this conflict, is going to be found.
But it's contradictory because you
Oh, it
cannot-
does. It is contradictory.
It's
But
completely
the
contradictory.
question really comes down to the Security Council, and do you need to revisit that and the whole way it's organized and the whole concept behind it? And that's a question for another day, I suppose.
Arnaud Danjean, what is going through the Security Council at this point worth when you see that Russia won't budge?
It has been blocked for the last year over Syria, but I think there is still room for diplomacy. Don't forget we have the G20 taking place in St. Petersburg this very week. And if you come up with strong evidence, with a solid case, Putin at some point might also have some interest to move, not spectacularly, not a big breakthrough, of course. I don't believe in that. But still, there is a space for diplomacy, since don't forget that Putin has no interest in having the West striking. And it's still a possible option. There can still be strikes without UN approval, and that would be a major setback for Putin's strategy, which was built against Yeltsin humiliation in '99 with the Kosovo case. So there is still some space for maneuver, and I fully agree with Anne Nivat. There is a full spectrum of possibilities between doing nothing and striking just for punishing.
All right. Do you agree, William Jordan, that you can still come up with something with the Russians at this point?
Well, I think we have to talk to them. I mean, if we don't continue talking to the Russians, if we don't continue to have some sort of a diplomatic engagement with them about Syria, there's no real hope for any kind of an eventual political solution. And so, yes, I mean, I think what's happening is that Barack Obama has bought time for something like this to happen. I mean, and he's also, by having pushed the deadline for a debate in the U.S. Congress, it's gone past the G20 summit, so there's no risk of an affront to the Russians who are organizing this summit. So that creates the situation in which people can talk about how to get out of this box that they put themselves in. And I think it also provides an opportunity, as has been said, as Anne Nivat just said, to look at the spectrum of other diplomatic possibilities, focusing on the chemical weapons use. I mean, I realize now that further sanctions against Syria is probably a waste of time. But to get the Russians on board, for example, to declare that whoever was ultimately found responsible for the chemical weapons attack is culpable in an international court of law or something like that, I think that is an important symbolic effort, and it allows everybody.
There's disagreement, by the way, on that point. Last week on this very set, one person quoting it as saying that we're playing the equivalent of CSI Damascus. Opposition activists from the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights claim the toll since the beginning of the uprising, and 99% of this is from conventional means, 110,000 dead. This is according to the opposition. With at least 40,000 civilians killed, including nearly 4,000 women, more than 5,800 children. When you look at those numbers, Arnaud Danjean, you said that you agree that there is a wide spectrum between doing nothing and sending missiles. What do you put in that spectrum?
I told you already, diplomacy. We are talking about G20.
Just diplomacy?
But diplomacy it's the main tool we have, and we always add for solving conflict situation. But even if you want to go further, and I think that's John McCain's point, which is relevant somehow, if you take the risk of striking, then go big and try to change the course of the war and take side. Because what Prime Minister Ayrault just said to me is non-relevant. Striking for punishing, but not trying to topple the regime or not trying to take side in this war, it doesn't make sense. If you go for war, you go for winning the war, because otherwise it's not worth taking risk.
But it's not the West's responsibility to end this conflict in Syria. It is up to the Syrian people to end this conflict. It is up to the rebels to organize themselves better to be able to carry out this conflict. It is up to the Syrian regime to accept that a political resolution of this conflict, this civil war, has to take place.
And I would just like to add, as Mr. Danjean said, that if you don't go to war and wanting to win it, the people in the field in Syria, they feel it, they understand it. I have been living among Iraqis, Afghans during the war, and they were all saying, explaining and repeating the same to me. You guys in the West, you are not here to win. What are you here for? And they feel it.
It's not their fight.
And it's changing our image. That's, going back to what we were saying before.
Right.
We should take care of that too.
All right, I want to thank all of you at this point, Anne Nivat, William Jordan, Douglas Herbert, Laurent Pinsol, and Arnaud Danjean in Brussels. Before we go, though, I want to get the latest from James Creedon. How are you, James?
Evening, François.
We heard the French Prime Minister a few moments ago. We heard the reaction of our panel to his remarks. And of course, the French President, I guess, a little bit out on a limb by what's happened in both London and Washington.
Well, certainly François Hollande is out on a limb too, and that's a theme that's being picked up by the French press today. The front pages of this morning's papers had one word again and again, piégé, trapped. And trapped by whom? Well, for Libération and for Le Figaro. Unusual that they would both agree on a topic.
Left, one's on the right.
He's been trapped, François Hollande has been trapped by Barack Obama. Why? Because after David Cameron was voted down by the British Parliament, which?
Not willingly.
Not willingly, indeed. Obama then remembered, as some have put it, that there is a parliament also in the US. It constitutionally has to be consulted for matters of war. So I'm not sure if that's being trapped. It's just remembering the realities. But in any case, a lot of people are describing it as that. Daniel Schneiderman for Arrêt sur Image, his website, is saying, trapped by Obama, trapped also by the French media. And he makes reference to the very militant position of newspapers such as Le Monde, who through reports going back to May and indeed editorials more recently have made a very strong case for war and essentially have concluded that Bashar al-Assad did use chemical weapons. So trapped by Obama, trapped by Cameron, trapped by the French media, perhaps François even trapped by himself.
Well,
right?
In the case of Le Monde, though, they brought back actual samples.
Right, absolutely. Examined in French military laboratories, etc., and they made a very strong case, saying, "Look, for us, this is conclusive." But for Le Lab d'Europe 1, another French political website, they remind us that François Hollande himself, in opposition, this is often the case, I suppose, in opposition.
He had more hair.
He had more hair, and he said some things that were slightly inconvenient for his current position in 2003 regarding Iraq, and again in 2008 regarding French military action in Afghanistan. He said, it is not the prerogative of the President of the Republic to take decisions on foreign and defence policy all by himself. Actually, constitutionally it is, but clearly he had another position on these matters when he was in opposition.
It really has sparked a constitutional debate in this country, this whole issue, what's happened over the last 72 hours.
Absolutely, because it shows the very strong position that the French president has compared to other heads of state or heads of government who can't act without consulting Parliament, or perhaps shouldn't. So François Hollande in a tough spot.
All right, thanks for that, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again, and thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate. Everybody's got to remain